one thing I see, because of my kid, I go into a lot of different trans forums, and I see that some kids really developmentally struggle
Mm.
with the tension of having parents that disagree with them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that comes back to the schools. There's a real, for some teachers and counselors, there's a real misunderstanding
Yeah.
around when, about the importance of the family
Mm-hmm.
system and the
Mm-hmm.
primacy of the family system and the ability for kids to grow into understanding that parents and children don't always agree with each
Mm-hmm.
other,
Mm-hmm.
but can still stay connected.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so much of the rhetoric in the forums is cut off people who don't see you the way you see yourself. Um, and seeing a young person kind of developmentally figure that out, that you can hold care and love and connection, despite what they're perhaps seeing online.
Yeah.
That's really important. And that's something that really kind of frightens me about what
Yeah.
I see going on in some schools where they do not understand that.
Yeah. I think that's very important because when you take a teenager who's like, let's say 14 or 15, they're naturally going to feel maybe a little more persecution by parents. Like that's part of the developmental trajectory. But if the school and the adults in the person's life can kind of stay grounded in a healthy view, which is like, I know you're angry at your parents. They love you. They have their opinions. You have your opinions. That kind of sets them up for growing up because most of the time, by the time a kid becomes a young adult, they have figured that out on their own. Like, oh, my parents are also humans and they have their own views and they don't have to, I can do things my own way, even if mom hates it. Like, I'm allowed to. So
Yeah.
it's really, really terrible when schools are kind of priming kids to push away, to estrange themselves, to cut ties when they're already developmentally like prone to do that anyway. It's really dangerous. And I totally agree with you.
The state has essentially put out guidelines. So it's not in the law, and this is going to definitely be
Mm.
tested in courts. It's being tested in courts now. But the State Department of Education put out guidelines saying, as soon as a kid announces a trans identity, you school personnel must change names and use their pronouns. And you school personnel must keep that confidential. I mean, to me, that's the key piece,
Mm.
that you must keep it confidential unless the child, tells you that you can tell the parents. And in the State Department of Education guidelines, they had not put any age limit on that. So the current court case that's coming forward is one where an 11-year-old was being assisted, went into a school counselor and said, I think I feel like a boy. And they started making all sorts of plans for this kid and keeping the parent out of the loop. And when the parent found out, rightfully so, flipped out. And I think part of the issue is that sometimes some of the teachers and personnel that are getting involved are actually not trained as counselors.
Mm.
And they don't know family systems and they don't know triangulation. And they don't understand child development or adolescent
Mm-hmm.
development. And so they are coming at it strictly from a sort of personal rights perspective, and an identity perspective without looking at the big picture as a whole. And so it makes me sad because I think our school counselors, they work so hard and many of them are so highly trained and they completely get this. If they get I know that locally, if a school counselor gets a secret like this from a kid, that the school counselor is almost always going to be like, not holding on to that.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be saying, look, how are you going to tell your parents? So they may hold a secret for a very short amount of time, but they're going to be working with the child to help them bring the family in. And that is a, really very healthy way and a well-trained way of moving forward. The ones that don't do that, the ones that just, try to keep it. And the horrible thing to me is like a whole school community may be keeping secrets from a family. And when the family ultimately finds out, they're humiliated, embarrassed that they were left out of this process, the damage that it does to the long-term relationship. And what stuns me about it is, like, so many times they will turn and say, oh, the American Academy of Pediatrics, for example, says that we should do these things. Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics does not say that you should do this. And it utterly floors me. Professional gender clinicians would never say to do this kind of thing. So schools that do this, they really are, I think, the long-term hurting children.
Yeah.
And they need to be really careful, because I know that parents are taking schools to court on this. I think there's so much misinformation and misunderstanding about gender identity and how we should talk about gender identity and how you support these kids, that it could take a while for this to kind of shake out and for there to be a healthy way forward. But I think that if you're a teacher or a school administrator who's in this, you need to be really, really cautious, because you may be doing more harm than good.
Yeah. That's such a good point. I hadn't even thought about that. Even the most kind of ardent gender clinicians loop in the family. So for schools to be deliberately keeping parents on the outskirts is a very kind of rogue intervention that nobody recommends for that.